All right. So this is UCLA's football analytics blitz presentation. We're really excited for this opportunity, and I guess we'll just jump straight into it. So, kind of what we're going to be talking about over the course of the presentation is what league trends are in terms of too high safety usage and why teams use it, and kind of touching upon which teams use it the most, the least, and who's most effective at it. And then kind of jumping into what we felt was the most optimal offensive strategy to counter the too high safety look, and kind of going into the specific matchup versus the Vikings, who would be playing too high safety, and looking at how that changes the look that the team we chose, uh, and how that impact works. So. Yeah, so kind of just starting with what the too high safety look is and how we understand it. Um, we see it as you have the two deep safeties who are kind of given some depth, and they each divide half of the field. And then we have kind of the linebackers and the corners who are playing slightly more intermediate looks, and they're covering that whatever's below those safeties. And the purpose of the too high safety look, from our understanding, is it's designed to cover the top of the field and take away and limit explosive plays so that you can force the offense to, not look for those deep shots and make the quarterback think twice before going deep, and kind of forcing them into shorter plays, which could, kind of cap drives off a bit earlier. So yeah, again, kind of jumping into why teams run too high safety. One of the primary reasons is the ability to disguise plays. So if you have two safeties back, then what you can do is on one side of the field you can run a cover two, and on the other side of the field maybe you could be running a cover four. So that allows for, defenses to rotate into multiple different coverage types, and offenses aren't able to read, okay, I'm not quite sure what the actual call might be post snap. So the disguisability is high, and that's why it's a very attractive option for defenses. And then kind of how I touched upon in the previous slide, deep ball takeaways are more often seen in too high safety look, because if you have two safeties back, you're basically able to double team any deep shots that might be coming on either corner of the field, which forces quarterbacks to throw into tighter windows, forcing more takeaways. So, kind of understanding the too high coverage deployment and league trends. So, based on analysis of the data, what we saw is that the too high safety look is often deployed on second and long and third and long. And in terms of field position, it would be maybe when an offense is a bit more backed up, it's more yards to go for first down, and you have two high safeties playing back so that you're limiting the long plays. Perhaps you're playing a little bit softer, but you're just kind of trying to get the defense off the field. And then it's also seen in kind of the red zone, lower red zone area. So that, maybe you're playing like two different coverages on both sides of the field. So you're disguising that coverage a bit, just trying to limit the offense from scoring in a league right now that's, very aggressive in the red zone. So that's kind of really important. And then in terms of the time remaining, something that we notice is it's often employed during the end of a half or the end of a game, where again, let's say if you're protecting a lead, then you want to limit those kind of big explosive plays down the field. You're okay with, a 5 or 6 yard intermediate play. But yeah, so you're just trying to optimize the game clock and delay scores. Um, yeah. Okay. So in the case prompt, kind of what it talked about, or kind of what it was asking about is, which teams in 2026 used the too high safety look the most, the least, and who is the most effective at it. And in terms of looking at the most and least frequent, we just looked at a simple proportion of defensive plays. So in the most frequent users, we saw Seattle, Philly, and Carolina using that the most. and then we saw Cleveland, Tampa, and the Jets using it the least. And then in terms of most effective and least effective, I think teams might define this in different ways. The way we went about doing it is looking at just simply at EPA. So, if teams are allowing the most negative EPA, then we would say that they're pretty effective at it. And then if teams are allowing the most positive EPA, then we would say they're the least effective at it when employing this look. So we saw kind of teams like Houston, Buffalo, and Jacksonville performing really well in this too high safety look. And then teams like Arizona, Cincinnati, and Dallas, who are, kind of notorious for having pretty like substandard defenses, at least in 2026. They were allowing kind of the highest EPA when running this look. So those are some pretty interesting things we noticed in analysis. Okay, so kind of thinking about the geometry and route concepts when running, kind of going against this too high safety look. So kind of switching gears from like the offensive strategy. So what we wanted to do first is we wanted to understand, okay, what does it mean to be successful against a too high safety look? So what we define that as is pretty much any play with positive EPA. So looking into the different routes, I just want to say I think the data was very useful in terms of like giving the routes that each player ran. I haven't seen a lot of data like that, especially in like a big data bowl or something like that. So I thought that was pretty cool. But yeah, we saw that against the too high shell, which was defined in the dictionary as cover two, cover four, or man cover two. We saw that crossing routes had, a pretty high EPA and a pretty high success rate. So I didn't write the success rate down on the slide here, but what we found was it was around 63 to 64%. So, and that kind of made sense because if you have two safeties playing kind of deep, that opens up some intermediate passing options. And, you're going to be pretty prone to having positive EP plays if you're running crossing routes, so any intermediate routes. And then we also saw that vertical routes versus cover two had a pretty high added EPA, but a slightly lower success rate. And this made sense because if you're kind of taking shots down the field or down the middle, so let's say you're running a post route that's, targeting the middle of the field, it's possible to split those two safeties and get, a very high EP play, but it's possible that that success rate is a little bit less since you have two safeties back who can essentially both, if they can see something before the play, then maybe they can both cheat towards the middle and you're kind of missing out and you could get a deep ball takeaway. So that explains why the success rate is a little less, but it is more volatile with higher value. And then we also saw that hook routes, so basically a curl route versus cover four had a pretty positive EPA, so around 0.34. Again, makes sense since this is a more kind of intermediate look, and if you have safeties too deep, like 10 to 12 yards, you can get like a 6 to 7 yard curl route, pretty decently while those safeties are down. So I guess what we were able to conclude is that the backbone of an offense versus the two high safeties should be intermediate passing concepts, such as those crossing routes. And, that makes sense logically. And we also saw that it generated the highest EPA across these structures. Um, and then you can kind of mix in vertical routes, some more explosive downfield plays. And you can also integrate the run, which we're going to talk about in the next slide, so that we're kind of touching upon your ability as an offense to disguise what you're doing. Because if you're consistently running the same formation or you're consistently running the same routes with the same players and not really running the ball, then you're not going to be able to disguise your look at all. And maybe it'll work temporarily, but a defense in the NFL is very quickly going to adapt to that. Um, so let's kind of jump into that. So integration of the run game. So when we looked at the data specifically, We saw that the run EPA was slightly negative overall versus too high, but in 11 personnel, that jumps up to a slightly positive look. So that was pretty interesting because initially we thought that uh, if you're running 12 personnel with two tight ends, then maybe you could have more positive EPA with the run, but that wasn't the case. So that was a pretty interesting thing that we saw. But since it's a very minimal positive EPA, we thought that, the run should still be integrated because it serves as a way to prevent safety compression. So kind of what that means is if you're consistently running the same intermediate passing routes, then it's possible that after a while, safeties start to cheat downhill. And that's not really something you want. So you want to mix it up a little bit with the run. The second thing, which we believed was one of the most important factors, is that you want to preserve play action credibility. So you want defenses to believe that there is actually a possibility that you run the ball against this look. Otherwise, they're going to have a much better idea or much cleaner idea of what's going to be coming in the pass game. And then your play is just not disguised at all. And there's no point of really scheming up for that. Um, and then, yeah, so protecting intermediate passing windows, kind of what I touched upon in terms of safety compression. So, in terms of the optimal strategy, it is kind of skewed towards the pass more, but you do want to mix it up with the run a little bit. So, as I talked about in the past, just a bit, crossing routes, hook routes, vertical, and shallow route packages. And then in the run, just kind of making sure that you're using that to in 11 personnel, it's possible that you have some successful EP plays, but it's not your main value driver. It's just to, preserve that unpredictability.
Yeah. So, after analyzing the league-wide trends, I'll go into a little bit of a coaching game plan that we had for specifically um, a real matchup, the New England Patriots versus the Minnesota Vikings cover two defense. So, the Patriots are a pass first team overall with 550 passes to 494 rushes with a big gap in EPA. So there's 0.247 for passing versus negative 0.032 for rushing. But as you can see against cover two specifically, the gap nearly disappears, where the rush EPA jumps to 0.218, almost matching the pass EPA of 0.236. However, there's much less rushing plays compared to passing plays. So against the Vikings, we think that the Patriots should try to increase their run rate, not because the run will win the game on its own, but because the lighter box makes it more viable. And like Verdon mentioned earlier, it sets up the play action to attack those intermediate windows and keeps the defense honest. Um, I'll touch a little bit on the passing side. So Verdon also mentioned this a little bit, but flats, hooks, and verticals are producing the best EPA against cover two, all above 0.39 EPA with strong sample sizes. And these are all intermediate concepts that attack the natural gaps in cover two between the linebackers and the safeties. And then for personnel, like Verdon mentioned as well, league-wide data shows 11 personnel produces the best EPA against cover two in both the pass and the run game. So this image on this slide is only shown for the passing game. But as you can see, 11 personnel has a zero point zero 0.06 average EPA compared to 12 personnel with zero point zero 0.01. But also in the run game, 11 personnel is more efficient with 0.01 EPA, while 12 personnel goes negative at negative zero point 0.3. And so the recommendation is to stay in 11 personnel as the base. It keeps the defense guessing since you can run or pass out of the same look. So overall, the game plan against Minnesota's cover two look is to stay light in 11 personnel, try to run the ball more than usual to exploit the box numbers, which will also eventually open up the pass for hooks, flats, and verticals.
Okay. To see how the play calling for the Vikings defense would change, with this visualization, we're looking at how the defense performs based on their coverage type against different alignments, and this is measured by the EPA allowed per play. Um, and the best ones for the Vikings are the ones with negative EPA against the receiver alignments, and those are mainly in the green. And the red ones are where there's positive EPA allowed by the Vikings. So against like single right, the best coverage type for the Vikings would be the cover one. And then in the balanced alignment, the best would be man cover two. And this continues along for all the receiver alignments. So then based on this, the coaches can evaluate, or like just seeing like based on how the offensive team is set up, the Vikings defense can adjust which cover type they wanna form in.
And then so for the specific play, so we first looked at the scenario we were given was that we were first and 10 on our own 35-yard line against Minnesota. And so based on their tendencies, they were most likely to run cover two. And so that was sort of the look we wanted to design our play against. And then using some of the things that Keith and Vardon talked about in terms of route concepts. So knew that we wanted to have verticals as our main deep attack, and then using the tight end as a crosser in terms of sort of a check down in case the linebackers get depth is sort of the bailout. And then within this specific matchup, so for the Patriots, we would run our slot receiver would be Stephon Diggs, our Z receiver would be Mac Hollins, our X receiver would be Kayvon Butte, and then our tight end would be Hunter Henry, and our running back would be Ramondre Stevenson. And so in terms of the progressions, there's sort of two variations we have for the play, which is either that the running back runs the wheel all the way or he sits in the flat as a check down. And then for the X receiver, he can either run a straight go or stem the route inside. And so the first read would be that if the safety goes along with the X, then we would keep running the wheel and aim to hit that in around the 15 to 20-yard mark. And then if not, if the free safety stays home, we would then look to the right side on the slot, which would be Stephon Diggs. And so for the slot, there's basically one read. If the strong safety goes out wide to help with the Z vertical, we could then hit the slot route either before the linebacker, or if the linebacker plays up, we can hit it over the top of the linebacker. And then in terms of if the safety on the right side stays down the middle, we would take the one-on-one with Mac Hollins, mostly because in this specific matchup, both of the Vikings starting corners are about 5'10", and then Mac Hollins is 6'4", and so we'd be able to take a deep shot with Mac Hollins down the right side on the one-on-one. And lastly, if all of those options are taken, we could then hit Hunter Henry on the crossing route over the middle. And then for sort of the reasoning behind it, one of the highest EPA plays against too high safety was the R2 running a post, so the second receiver from the right side running a post. And then verticals as well had the highest EPA against cover two. And as we mentioned before, crosses targeted led to about a 75% success rate against too high safeties. And so with this option, we could take deep shots, and then if all the safeties and the corners stay home, we can still hit the tight end for around a 5 to 7 yard gain, which on first and 10 is still valuable, and it's not necessary that we hit a deep shot every time. And just one last thing, in the diagram, it does say QB option with the specific matchup of Mac Jones, or sorry, not Mac Jones, Drake May being able to run. We do have an option to run out of this and have the slot receiver and the Z receiver block in order to disguise the look if we want to run this out of this personnel multiple times. And yeah.
Yep. So that is pretty much what we had in terms of the presentation. So I believe the rest of the time is for Q&A. So I guess we can open it up to that.
And yeah, judges are free to ask questions as long as they're remaining. Yeah, good job, guys. Good stuff on the presentation and breaking down the different numbers and things that you guys had. Um, was there anything from a data perspective that you wish you guys had to further your analysis even more?
Um, I would say this is some of the most comprehensive data I've seen in terms of route running. But one thing I did notice is that for any data related to the run, the the pre-snap coverage, at least that was seen from a defensive perspective, was all kind of null. So I think it would have been pretty cool to see how defenses were lined up, at least for run plays, and that would have given maybe some greater analysis in terms of, okay, if we think that a defense is in that too high safety look, then how did the run perform against specifically a cover two or specifically a cover four? But in this case, we just had to assume, at least we just set the parameter where, okay, if there were if the number of safeties was two on a run play, then we would just assume that they're running a too high safety look. But the amount of assumption that would be required would be a bit less if we had that pre-snap coverage data for the run. And then uh, I think that would be kind of the main thing. I thought that, I mean, we had the routes mostly covered for each position player, and we had most of the game data as well. So I thought that was the main limiting factor, but the rest of it was pretty comprehensive.
Sweet, cool. Yeah, good presentation, guys.
Thank you.
I had a question, but also just wanted to bring up, like, I think you guys touched on it a little bit, which I thought was interesting because I thought about this every once in a while. When you talked about like the optimal strategy, you guys talked a little bit about like the patterns and whatnot, right? Like, because you want to still be able to use play action, um, kind of like the exact mix that you want to use. And I was kind of curious if you guys had like thought about or had a chance to look into like sequences of like, kind of how you could sequence the plays to, because I know you mentioned, let me pull this up again. Like I think you mentioned like if you ran like a certain route enough times, like the safeties might crash down a lot more and you would be able to get them, running a deeper route after that or whatnot. I was just kind of curious if you guys had looked into like a sequence for that, or was there something that like made you say that, or was it more so just like, kind of football knowledge as a whole?
Yeah, I think that that's definitely something we could utilize the data for. But yeah, I think a lot of it was more football knowledge from what like a cover two defense might how they might react. But definitely that's definitely something to look into in terms of what you said, like with sequencing and how they might react like later in the game if you ran a certain route concept earlier on.
Yeah, I was just kind of curious because it's something I've thought about, but also like to be honest, there might not actually be anything there. It's like sequencing is just a really hard problem in general,
Yeah,
both in football and also baseball, to be honest. So, but I just thought it was kind of curious you guys touched on it. So great job there.
definitely. Thank you.
Forgive me if you mentioned this in your presentation, I just missed it, but how did you guys land on using New England as the offensive team that you wanted to design your play around?
Yeah, I guess one of the first reasons was just that New England had the highest success rate against too high among the three teams that we were able to look at. And then I think given the three teams sort of receivers and their matchups. I think that one thing I liked a lot about New England was having a big wide receiver to run the vertical route, as opposed to Buffalo and Kansas City, who have usually smaller and more speed receivers. And so that was sort of the rationale behind that.